Hey guys, just wanted to talk to you about evangelism. Alright, so here's some tips about it, and here's some understanding of what it means to do apologetics and what it means to evangelize to other people. The study of apologetics in evangelism. People are sometimes afraid to evangelize because they associate evangelism with door-to-door knocking and talking to complete strangers about Jesus. But this is not all evangelism is about. There are many different ways to evangelize and different people to do, the different styles with. What we will study here is how different biblical characters have different styles of evangelism based on their character. We may identify a style that suits us better than one and stop trying to force ourselves to do something that is not natural for us to do. So it is good to pick one style, guys, right? If you can, and focus on that and say, hey, this is me, this is how I'm going to evangelize to people. Continuing on. When evangelism becomes natural, we will start. On the other hand, if we try to do something that is not natural for us, the experience may be so traumatic that we conclude evangelism is not for us, and that we stop doing it altogether, which is a no-no, right? We all need to be evangelizing, at least to some degree, because that's what God has called us to do, each and every one of us who are Christians and saved. God, who created us, also knows our talents, our gifts, right? He knows our style. As we will see later, God called different ones to fulfill different tasks, depending on their style, right? Many will agree that they tend to meet people that are particularly suited for them to minister to, right? We tend to meet people sometimes that are like us, right? And that makes it easier to talk to them, right? Kind of get along with easier and knows our approach, right? And gets our approach better than someone else. Then it's going to be easier to talk to that person if they can kind of understand our approach and the way that we talk, right? For example, someone who is the intellectual type, or uses his brain a lot in talking, right, meets many people who need that kind of reasoned approach, right? When we go out and evangelize, there are people who like to have an intellectual debate, right? Or they like to talk about the science, history, people can say, oh, I know that's a fact, and I can therefore trust what you're saying, right? A person who is good with the practical approach often encounters people with needs that he can minister to, right? So a practical approach would be like someone who is meeting someone's needs in a holistic way, right? Giving them like food or water, or just being a friend to them, right? And letting them know that God cares about them, coming alongside them in their life wherever they need help at, right? That's a practical approach, and often it's a great way to evangelize to people, and one of the most effective ways is showing the heart of God, which is love, right? And coming alongside people in their problems. This study is not intended to segregate Christians, which means to separate Christians, strictly into several groups, but in reality, it's actually to teach and to reach people for Christ, right? It's to use our gifts where we're best suited, right? We will often have to use, the different types of approaches, right? We have several approaches, right? Yet we will find ourselves having one dominant or one main style that suits us and is effective for us, when we're on the evangelism field. It is fair to say that we should concentrate more time and energy on the evangelism style that suits us best. And I kind of want to go into what we're talking about when I'm saying styles. So the first style here that we have is confrontational. A good example of this, a good Bible character example of this, we have Peter, right? And he's very confrontational. Peter comes to mind as someone who is of that confrontational style, because when Jesus asked him, his disciples, in Matthew 16:15, who they thought he was, when Jesus said, "Who do you think I am?" to his disciples, Peter did not even, he didn't even stop for a second. He just blurted out what he had to say, right? He was head on with it, right? He didn't mix words, he didn't mince words, right? He was straight on with it. He came right at Jesus and told him who he thought he was. He declared clearly that he thought Jesus was the Messiah, the Son of God, right? Then a few verses later, he challenged Jesus, stated what Jesus' stated mission, head on, right? So Jesus says, what I'm here to do, right? That I'm going to, suffer and die and rise again. And Peter says, far be it, don't, you're not going to die, right? Your plan's got to be different than that, right? So Peter challenges, he confronts, he challenges Jesus, whether it's in a good way or a bad way. Sometimes he does it in a bad way. In that example, it's a bad way. Matthew 16:13 through 22. If you want to follow along with me, you can. It's on this, but you can also look at it in your Bibles as well. When Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say the Son of Man is?" They replied, "Some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and still others, Jeremiah or one of the prophets. But what about you?" Jesus asked them. "Who do you say I am?" Simon Peter answered right away. He answered, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." From that time on, Jesus began to explain to his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things at the hand of the elders and the chief priests and the teachers of the law, and he must be killed on the third day to be raised to life again, to pay the price for sins, right? Peter took him aside, though, and began to rebuke him, or he told him, "No way, never, Lord," he said, "this shall never happen to you." Peter is the kind of person that dares to confront someone, even the Messiah, the Son of God, with his plans. When he has something to say, he's going to say it directly. Another clue to Peter's confrontational style can be detected when he cut off the ear of one of the men who wanted to arrest Jesus. This can be found in John 18, verses 3 through 10. So Judas came to the grove, guiding a detachment of soldiers and some officials from the chief priests and Pharisees. They were carrying torches, lanterns, and weapons. Then Simon Peter, who had a sword, drew it and struck the high priest's servant, cutting off his right ear. Because of his confrontational style, God placed him in a position that requires directness and boldness. On the day of Pentecost, it was Peter who became the spokesman for the whole group of believers at Pentecost. And he did it right in Jerusalem, where Jesus had only been crucified weeks ago, right? And he confronted thousands of people and was able to speak directly and boldly for Christ. A person with a confrontational style has no problem doing door-to-door evangelism and doesn't mind talking to strangers. They can talk in front of a group of people and feel comfortable. He has no difficulty confronting anybody about things like religion or other topics that are a little bit, hard to talk about in some places. They're pretty calm. They're pretty cool to talk about their beliefs and their values, right? Regardless of, how awkward it may be for other people. This style is not only applicable or usable when done with strangers. A person with a confrontational style. A good example of an intellectual biblical character would be Paul. Paul, the apostle, intellectual style. He did quite often. The hallmark of his approach, or the main approach that he did actually take, was a logical and reasoned presentation of the gospel. As you can see in Acts 17, verses 2 through 4, as his custom was, Paul went into the synagogue, and on 3 Sabbath days he reasoned with them from the scriptures, explaining and providing that the Christ had to suffer and rise from the dead. "This Jesus I am proclaiming to you is the Christ," he said. Some of the Jews were persuaded and joined Paul and Silas, as did a large number of God-fearing Greeks, and not only a few prominent women as well. Paul tells us to be ready at all times to defend the gospel, or to give a reason for your faith, in other words. That means that to be fully equipped, we must be able to defend the gospel against attacks of science, other religions, philosophies, or other. To be ready, with intellectual reasoning to persuade them that the gospel is worth looking into, right? 1 Peter 3:15, "But in your heart set apart Christ as Lord. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you now have. But do this with gentleness and respect." When God wanted to send someone to the highly educated philosophers in Athens, who was Paul to go to them, right? Because he knows that he can use Paul as an intellectual debater, right? In Acts 17, there Paul presented an ingenious argument, starting from the Athenian idol to an unknown God, and then moving in eventually to the one true God and his son Jesus, who came to die for us, right? He came in from their standpoint and took their beliefs that they already had, and then he challenged them, and then he gave them the proof of Christ, right? And leads them to God, right? Acts 17, 22 through 34 says, Paul then stood up in the meeting of the Areopagus and said, which was like the big meeting of the Athenian elders and the head of the schooling there, and said, Men of Athens, I see that in every way you are very religious. For as I walked around and looked carefully at your objects of worship, I even found an altar with the inscription, To an unknown God. Now what you worship is something that is unknown. I am about to proclaim to you, though. The God who made the world and everything in it is the Lord of heaven and earth, and does not live in temples built by human hands. For he has set a day when he will judge the world with justice by the man he has appointed. He has given proof of this to all men by raising him from the dead. When they heard about the resurrection of the dead, some of them sneered, but others said, We want to hear you again on this subject. At that Paul left the council. A few men became followers of Paul and believed. Among them was Dionysius, a member of the Areopagus, also a woman named Damaris, and a number of others. If you belong to this style of approach, the intellectual one, you have a responsibility to build yourself up in the Word and in knowledge, and God will use you to touch the lives of people who are genuinely seeking God and who need the truth to set them free from their sins and to turn to Christ for their salvation and healing. If you have a different approach here, this is our third one, invitational. The other two didn't apply to you. This one might. After Jesus, called the tax collector Matthew to become one of his followers, Matthew, also known as Levi, invited many of his friends to his house to hear Jesus. This is the invitational style, right? Matthew invites his friends to come and hear. Luke 5:27 through 29. After this, Jesus went out and saw a tax collector by the name of Levi, or Matthew, his actual name, sitting at his tax booth. Follow me, Jesus said to him. And Levi got up, left everything, and followed him. Then Levi held a great banquet for Jesus at his house, and a large crowd of tax collectors and others were eating with them. Matthew replied on the friendship he had built with others, with other peoples, and as a basis to invite them to the events that were, happening at his house with Jesus, right? So he used the relationships that he had and said, hey, we're friends. Let's do something cool together. Let's hang out with Jesus, right? Let's hear what this guy has to say together, right? So he uses an invitational and a friendship-based approach, right? An invitational approach to the gospel and to evangelism. The other person in the Bible who used this approach was the Samaritan woman, right? The Samaritan woman at the well. After she had found the Messiah, she went out and invited her entire village people to come and hear about Jesus in Samaria, right? She asked everybody in her town to come and hear about what the Lord had said to her, right? John 4:28 through 30 says, Then leaving her water jar, the woman went back to the town and said to the people, Come see a man who told me everything I have ever did. Could this be the Christ? They came out of the town and made their way toward him. I mean, friendship is very important if we are to talk about, spiritual things with people, right? If we're going to talk about spiritual events and spiritual people, right, and spiritual things, they need to know that, that we're trustworthy, right? That we are coming alongside them, that we're actually doing this for their own good and not any other motives, right? We're just doing it because we care about them and nothing else, right? So it's much more effective, I think, with people when we're able to do this relational, invitational approach very well. If you're good at this approach, then definitely use this one, right? Definitely use the approach that is suited to you, right? Whether it be the previous two or this one right here or the next one we're about to go over, okay? So definitely keep in mind your style and your approach, and decide that before going out, right? And sometimes if you don't have a good idea of which style you have, you can kind of figure it out by asking your friends which personality type you feel like you are. If you don't know yourself, you can ask your closer friends for that, or even your leaders, right? They might be able to help you understand your own personality type if you don't quite know yourself. Or you can test it out yourself by going out and trying one of these styles, and if it doesn't really work for you, you can try another one until you get to the point where you feel comfortable using a certain style, right? So when we use the invitational approach, it will be negative if we only call people when we want to invite them to an event, right? The not being real with them about the friendship, right? We need to be genuine about making relationships with them, right? One practical tool that we can use is a booklet to write down who are the people we want to minister to and have a schedule to do friendship events with them, like calling them, meeting them, sending them a card, etc., letting them know that you care about them, right? Many people will turn down an invitation to a Christian event if they are invited by strangers, but these same people will go if they are invited by friends. We can use friendship as an asset or a way to get people to come to know Christ, right? Testimonial, one who used this approach is the blind man that Jesus healed in John chapter 9. John chapter 9, verses 15 through 25 says, "Therefore the Pharisees also asked him how he had received his sight. He put mud on my eyes," the man replied, "and I washed, and now I see." Some of the Pharisees said, "This man is not from God, for he does not keep the Sabbath." But others asked, "How can a sinner do such miraculous signs?" So they were divided. He, or in other words, the blind man, replied, "Whether he is a sinner or not, I don't know. One thing I do know, I was blind, but now I see." If God has done something miraculous in your life, you can use this testimonial approach very effectively, right? It can minister to so many people. It may not be a physical healing. It may be an inner transformation of your life, right? Your complete transformation of how you live and how you love, right? That makes you a different person today. Some people think that they cannot be effective witnesses for God because they don't know the Bible well and can only share their testimonies, right? These people should think again, though. Jesus even turned down the request of a man who had been delivered out of a demon possession to become his follower simply because he knew that this man could become even a more effective witness by sharing his own testimony. Mark 5:18 through 20 says, "As Jesus was getting into the boat, the man who had been demon-possessed begged to go with him. Jesus did not let him, but said, 'Go home to your family and tell them how much the Lord has done for you, and how he has had mercy on you.' So the man went away and began to tell people in the Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him. And all the people were amazed who heard him." There are many people who will not respond well to a challenge or an argument, but will be touched in the heart when they hear of how God is working in your own life. A person who has used this approach effectively is Joni Eareckson Tada, a quadriplegic woman, which means she can't walk and she's in a wheelchair, whose account of how God helped her through her accident points people towards Jesus Christ. I'll start you off with Acts 9:36 through 39. In Joppa there was a disciple named Tabitha, which when translated is Dorcas, who was always doing good and helping the poor. About that time she became sick and died. All the widows stood around him, crying and showing him the robes and other clothing that Dorcas had made while she was still with them. Acts 2:44 through 47. All the believers were together and had everything in common. Selling their possessions and goods, they gave to anyone as he had need. Every day they continued to meet together in the temple courts. They broke bread in their homes and ate together with glad and sincere hearts, praising God and enjoying the favor of all the people. And the Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved. All right, That's an important thing to note, that they were gathering together, right? This community, this practical approach is often brought about by community and gathering together and doing things together, like community events like eating together or having a big party or something like that. That's a practical way to share the gospel with others, because you're already having an event that they want to come to, and then you can share the gospel about Jesus Christ with them. No doubt this method was effective, as many people were touched and saved because of their kind acts and because of the community they brought about. This is also the method advocated by people such as Ed Silva. I don't know how to say that guy's name. As Ed in his book says, that none should perish. The Institute of American Church Growth polled more than 14,000 Christians and asked them, what or who was responsible for you coming to Christ? 90% of the respondents stated that a friend or a relative who cared for them and invested their own time in them was the primary factor in their decision to accept Christ as their Savior. Even people who are resistant to the gospel will drop their hostility if Christians are kind to them. And that's kill them with kindness, right? Kill them with love, right? Receive. The early Christians gained favor among the people through kind acts and unselfish sharing. God can use our resources to help other people and thereby show kindness. What do you have that can help your friend in need? That means that when we share the gospel with them in the future, it is more likely that they will listen to us because we have earned the right to be heard. It does not mean that they will definitely believe, but they will probably hear us out sincerely and seriously, while others who have not ministered to them in this way may not even have the opportunity to be heard, and they might not even listen to it all. Alright, that's the last of our approaches here. As you can see, the car guy is going off crazy, so we'll end it at that. Thank you guys for listening, and I hope you guys learned a little bit about evangelism.